What's wrong?
I was just worried about your response. That's all.
You've done a brilliant job, mate. Brilliant job.
The repair shop built its reputation on a premise so minimal it almost shouldn't function on television. Bring in a broken object with a personal story behind it. Let a team of skilled craftspeople restore it with care. Then watch the owner encounter it again for the first time in years or decades. No competition, no elimination, no prize money waiting at the end. Just expertise, patience, and the specific emotional charge that comes from holding something your grandmother also held, now cleaned and working and carrying the faint smell of the workshop that brought it back. Millions of people in Britain and around the world found something in that format that most television wasn't offering them anymore. A kind of slowness, a kind of sincerity, and a weekly reminder that care is a skill that can be practiced and passed on. The man who delivered the human warmth at the center of all of it, who greeted every guest and made even the most guarded storyteller open up within minutes of meeting him, was Jay Blades. That trust took years to build, reached people in ways they couldn't always articulate, and made him one of the most recognized faces in British daytime television. When it fractured publicly in late 2024 under the weight of a criminal charge, it pulled the BBC, the courts, and every viewer who had ever switched on the show expecting gentleness into territory none of them had been prepared for. Jay Blades didn't find furniture restoration through any kind of career planning. Growing up in London with his mother Barbara, money was always short and new things rarely entered their home. Whatever they had, they kept. Whatever broke, they repaired. Jay has said more than once that they never bought furniture the way other families did, that they simply worked with what already existed, patching and reusing without calling it restoration or giving it any name at all. Those early habits carved something into him that formal schooling never reached, because school, for Jay, was a long and consistently painful experience. Year after year, his inability to keep pace was treated as a motivation problem or a behavioral issue by everyone around him. The real explanation didn't surface until he was 31 years old, when a literacy assessment revealed that his reading ability matched what most children develop by age 11, and that the cause was dyslexia, undiagnosed across an entire childhood, an adolescence, and the first decade of his adult life. Rather than retreating from that diagnosis, Jay handled it the way he approaches damaged furniture, by looking at it directly and deciding what could be done. By 2022, he agreed to film a BBC documentary called Jay Blades, Learning to Read at 51, which followed him through the genuinely unglamorous process of learning phonics as a grown man in full public view. During filming, he admitted that he had spent decades concealing his inability to read, relying on voice notes and other people's assistance, and practiced instinct to function in situations where literacy was expected. The documentary put all of that on screen without softening a moment of it. Viewers responded in large numbers because what Jay described, that particular kind of private shame that accumulates silently over years while the world keeps moving, was something many people recognized as their own, whether or not they had ever spoken about it to anyone. His childhood in 1980s London carried more than academic difficulty. Growing up as a young black man in that era and that city, Jay encountered racism that sometimes turned physical. He has described being mistreated by police at 14 years old in the back of a police van, an experience that left lasting emotional marks regardless of whether any official record was ever made. Later in life, a discovery about his father added a different kind of weight. The man had 25 other children scattered across different countries, most of whom Jay had never met. That revelation reshaped his understanding of family, of belonging, and of the particular kind of absence that leaves its mark without being physically present. These details emerged gradually, offered by Jay himself on his own terms, and most of the public received them as background texture behind a personality they had already come to trust. The fuller picture behind that warmth was considerably harder than any weekly restoration program could hold. Before the cameras found him, Jay ran a social enterprise called Out of the Dark, based in High Wycombe, where he trained disadvantaged young people in furniture restoration. The project carried everything he had built his beliefs around: practical skills, second chances, and the specific dignity that comes from turning something damaged back into something whole. None of that protected it when the funding dried up in 2015. Out of the Dark closed and everything else collapsed alongside it. His marriage ended. His income disappeared. For a period, Jay was living out of his car, shielding the extent of the collapse from almost everyone who knew him. People close to him later described him as having genuinely gone missing during that stretch, not as a figure of speech but in a way that caused serious concern for his safety. A close friend found him and helped bring him back, and the rebuilding that followed was slow, unglamorous, and came without any guarantee it would hold permanently. The repair shop arrived in 2017, and Jay came to it carrying something no amount of media training produces. He connected with strangers the way people connect when they have actually survived something, and viewers responded to that quality without necessarily understanding what they were picking up on. The series had been running on BBC Two since March 27th of that year, filmed at the Weald and Downland Living Museum in Singleton, West Sussex, where timber-framed buildings and open countryside give every episode an atmosphere unlike anything else in British television. The audience grew steadily enough to push the program from BBC Two all the way to BBC One by Series 4. By 2023, The Repair Shop won the National Television Award for Best Daytime Show, competing against programs with far longer histories. 14 series and more than 300 episodes came from a format that most commissioners in television would have dismissed before a pilot was even proposed. Steve Fletcher had been part of the show from that first series, working as the resident clock and watch restorer, a trade he entered at 16 and built a full career around long before any camera found him. His family had worked in horology since the 80s, and alongside the show, Steve runs his own clock workshop in Oxfordshire, where Jay brought emotional momentum and a hosting presence that made guests feel genuinely seen. Steve delivered precision and the quiet authority that develops from decades spent with mechanical systems that punish impatience and reward careful attention. Their friendship developed in the background of the show's rise, without ceremony or public display, the way professional relationships between people who genuinely respect each other's work tend to grow over years of being in the same room. The show itself, by the time the scandal emerged, had become something the BBC treated as a trusted cultural asset. International versions had launched in Australia, the Netherlands, and Belgium, each adapting the format to local audiences while preserving the same values. At home, the program drew millions of viewers weekly to a show built around craftspeople fixing objects in a barn, which in television terms represents a significant achievement. The human element, the stories behind the objects, the emotions at each reveal, the visible care in every restored item had accumulated into something with genuine cultural weight. Jay's presence had been inseparable from that weight for nearly 7 years. November 2024 arrived without warning. Reports confirmed that Jay Blades had been formally charged with controlling and coercive behavior toward his wife, Lisa Boson, a fitness instructor he had married in 2022. Court documents placed the alleged conduct between January and September of that year, during a period when Jay was still appearing publicly and the couple had shown no outward signs of serious difficulty. Under UK law, controlling and coercive behavior describes a pattern of conduct designed to isolate, intimidate, or dominate a partner, and it carries full criminal weight without requiring any physical violence to have occurred. Jay entered a not guilty plea. A trial was scheduled for August 2025. Leaving close to a year of legal and public uncertainty ahead for everyone involved. The BBC moved quickly. Multiple episodes featuring Jay were pulled from the broadcast schedule, and his appearances in upcoming episode openings were edited out before airing. No formal statement directly linked these decisions to the criminal proceedings, but the timing was unmistakable, and those familiar with how broadcasters manage reputational exposure ahead of pending trials recognized the approach immediately. Jay stepped back from filming, deactivated his social media accounts, and resigned from several roles held outside television, including a chancellor position at a UK university. The public response divided along lines that have become familiar in these situations, with some longtime viewers struggling to reconcile the warmth they had watched on screen with the allegations now attached to his name, while others pointed out that a charge and a verdict are different things, and that the legal process existed precisely to make that determination. His retreat from public life had actually begun slightly before the charges were confirmed, following the death of his uncle Richard Brathwaite, someone Jay described as a genuinely supportive figure who understood what second chances actually cost. In the weeks after his uncle's passing, Jay had already begun stepping back from commitments, including a scheduled appearance at the Hay Festival. He acknowledged at that point that he was seeking therapy and counseling to manage his grief, framing it not as a crisis response but as care he recognized he needed. That directness was entirely consistent with how Jay had always handled public discussions of his mental health, honestly, without the managed language that handlers prefer, and without pretending that difficult things were less difficult than they actually were. Then came the photograph. Steve Fletcher posted it himself, without announcement or preparation, with a caption that described stopping in to see Jay for tea during a break from the Secrets from the Barn tour, noting simply that it had been a lovely chat and that he hoped to see him again soon. The image showed the two of them side by side, arms around each other, relaxed and smiling. For Steve, privately, perhaps nothing fundamental had changed in how he understood his friend of several years. Publicly, though, the post landed in the middle of an active criminal case and a national conversation about coercive control, about who tends to get believed in these situations, and about what it communicates when someone with public visibility chooses to stand visibly beside someone facing serious allegations. Some viewers called it loyalty worth recognizing. Others found it poorly considered. Steve offered no further explanation, and the BBC declined to comment on the post at all. What the photograph accomplished, beyond generating sustained debate, was to redistribute the show's public weight in a way that could no longer be ignored. Without Jay carrying the emotional through line of each episode, the introductions, the guest conversations, the reunion moment when a restored object is finally brought back out, the program reorganized itself around those who stayed. Steve moved into that space the way he does everything, without announcement, with his tools, and with the steady focus he has brought to the workshop since 2017. Whether the repair shop carries its original warmth through this period, whether Jay Blades eventually returns to the barn that his presence helped define across nearly a decade, and what the trial ultimately determines for everyone involved, all of that stays genuinely open. What is already settled is that The Repair Shop, a program built entirely on the conviction that broken things deserve patient and skilled attention, is now working through a fracture of its own, doing quietly what it has always done, continuing, carefully, to see what can be restored.